Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Gold. I'm a technology policy reporter for Axios here in Washington, D.C. We're here to have a fireside chat with Rob Sherman, who's Vice President and Deputy Chief Privacy Officer for Policy at Meta. We're going to be talking about open source AI, the regulation of large language models, and other pressing topics in our field today. We're going to hear from Rob about Meta's development of its suite of open source llama models. So come on up, Rob. Hello.
Hi, Ashley.
So we are here with an audience full of AI interested people to talk about open source. I don't think this is a crowd that is all that confused about open source versus closed source, but we should start with some scene setting nevertheless. So from your perspective, what are the key benefits and risks of open source AI? And in general, why has Meta embraced the open source approach thus far with the rollout of your AI products?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for being here, and thanks to everyone. I think this is, an unprecedented time of excitement about AI, and having this many people at a conference like this, I think, is just really timely, but also important given the challenges that we have ahead of us. Just by way of background, I've been at the company for about 12 years at this point, and AI has been really a critical part of what we've done for pretty much all that time. And so whether that's, making sure that people are seeing the newsfeed stories and ads that are right for them, or making sure that we're using AI to combat harmful content on the platforms, AI has been a very important part of Meta and Facebook before that, really for as long as I've been at the company. When it comes to open source, that's also been a really foundational part of what we've done. We've all been talking about AI in the context of large language models like Llama, which is the models that we've just released about 2 weeks ago. We released an update. But actually, we have a pretty long tradition of open sourcing AI. We have a foundational AI research lab that's been in existence for 10, 11 years at this point. And some of the foundational technologies that people use to build AI around the world have come out of that lab as open source projects. And so, a lot of, your question is sort of like, why do that? Why, what's the benefit? I think, one of the things that we think about is we will make, and I think this is probably the primary thing, we will make more progress as a society and as a community in building AI if we can do that together, because we can, rather than relying just on one company's, developers, we're actually relying on a broad global community. And so I think we can, the bet is that by open sourcing, we help everybody move forward. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is that building openly is more trustworthy, right? And I think, we're a company that, people have lots of questions about what we're doing, I think appropriately want to pressure test the approach that we're taking. And I think our general posture is the more open we are and the more that people can look under the hood and kick the tires, the more trustworthy the technology will be. And I think for something like AI, and particularly generative AI, that's foundational for all of these things, for all the things that, we want to do as a society and that as a technology community we want to build, making sure it's trustworthy is pretty paramount. And then the final thing I'd say is open sourcing is probably the most important thing we can do for American competitiveness and more broadly to enable this technology to be leveraged not just by a handful of small technology or large technology companies, but actually by developers, governments, nonprofits all around the world that have really innovative ideas and have the ability to solve specific problems, but don't necessarily have the resources, the GPUs and the money and the expertise to train large language models. So that's kind of how we've thought about it, and why we've thought it's important for the past, certainly over the past couple of years and before that as well. You asked also about the risks, and I think it's important to say we're not dogmatic. Open source has been an important part of what we've done, but we're not dogmatic about it. And I think one of the things that's important is to do both pre-release evaluations and post-release evaluations that feed into our future work to make sure that we're understanding what the risks of the technology are. And when it's appropriate and beneficial to open source, we certainly want to do that. And that's kind of a default for us. But we also have certainly made decisions in other cases where it's not appropriate to open source. And I think that's a decision that needs to be on the table as well.
So, a lot of complexity there, a lot of shades of it. It's not like everything at Meta that has to do with AI is open source. And, I cover regulations. So how do you think the regulatory conversation around open source AI in Washington has been so far? Are lawmakers getting it right? What have you seen that you think is a promising sign? And ultimately, how do you think the government should treat open source AI, especially compared to more proprietary systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important discussion. One of the things, and as somebody that I live in DC, and we were talking before, grew up in DC, so I have a lot of a lot of affinity for this town and the way that we think about things. And what I think is really important, and what I find gratifying about the approach that folks have taken to AI here is there's not been sort of the rush to regulate as a checkbox exercise, the way you might worry for a technology that's moving as quickly as it is that's happened. So when we look at, I know Senator Schumer was here at this conference talking in the Insight forums that he led. I think we're really an effort to get below the surface of what are the challenges. What are the things that we need to be thinking about in terms of building and regulating AI, and to do it from that perspective. And then more recently, the administration, as a part of the executive order that the Biden administration put out, is really doing a whole of government exercise to try to understand the implications. And one thing that I think is really valuable about that is, we're starting with what are the technologies that we want to enable, and what are the government agencies and authorities that exist where we already know how to think about some of these problems, and how do we deploy those tools to solve the challenges that AI is raising. And then I think related to that is then what's net new. And I think that's where we're having this conversation now with the USAI Safety Institute, is really trying to zero in on what are the net new challenges and what we need to figure out. And in order to make sure that the technology is good for society and good for the American economy rather than bad. And what I would say in terms of the right way to do this, and I think this is the direction that I see the government going in, is really trying to get concrete really quickly, right? I think it's important to move away from, AI is risky and we need to manage risks, and to have that be a generic talking point, to saying what are the different kinds of things we need to be thinking about, both to ensure the growth and advancement of this technology so that it can be all it can be from a positive side, but also what are the specific risks we need to be worried about, and what can we do to evaluate them and mitigate them. And moving from the sort of high level conversation to the what should we all actually be doing is, I think, the most urgent piece right now.
And what is your assessment of sort of where we're at? Are we in the right spot with that conversation? Have we gotten concrete enough yet? Are you hoping we would move a little faster?
Well, I think we're still in the middle of having that discussion. So, the NTIA just, sought comment on open source as an example, but it's a part of a broader set of efforts on the part of the administration to think about these things. I'm actually going, I think, the week after next to Korea, where there's a global government summit that follows on the UK hosted one in Bletchley Park last year. There's one coming up in Korea that's co-hosted by the UK and Korean governments, really to sort of leverage the work that's been done in the USAI Safety Institute and then companion safety institutes in other countries, to think about how do we move from the problem definition phase to the problem, or to the solution definition phase. And, particularly, I think the safety institutes, if they, if they live up to their promise, which I hope they will be really important vehicles for moving from the problem definition to solution definition.
And in general, it just sort of keeping global harmony with countries like South Korea, with the UK, with the EU. Is it more promising than past tech policy debates as far as keeping people generally on the same page? Does it feel any different to you? Do you think there'll be a sort of more harmonization with AI than maybe privacy or other past topics you've grappled with?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that feels different is this technology and the place that we are with it feels fundamentally different to me than the technologies that have come before, that we've had to think about how to regulate. And that's because the technology is moving so quickly. We really don't have the luxury of sort of putting a bunch of stuff out in the world and then seeing what breaks and then regulating it after. We also don't have the luxury of putting together a bunch of legislative measures that we don't know if they're going to work or not, and then sort of see what breaks in that way. And so I think what's needed, and what we're seeing with these global convenings and sort of the efforts of the governments to collaborate, is really to bring together governments and civil society and companies that are building this stuff, so we can have some of these discussions in parallel, and really, as we're building the technology and making these decisions, work together as a community to decide what are the right ways to do it. So I think that's critically important. I think the flip side of this, the sort of counterfactual for what you could worry about, is if we don't do that, then a bunch of technology is going to be built in ways that doesn't have broad buy-in or broad consultation, which is going to have a bunch of downstream problems for society. But then also for companies like ours, we are building one set of, Llama, our large language models, are one set of models for the world, right? And we're building them once and trying to do that in a way that meets the needs of people all around the world and developers around the world. If we have fundamentally different sets of expectations and governments aren't cooperating, then the net result is just more people will not have access to this technology because there won't be a way to build it once for the world. And so I think, both in terms of keeping people safe and maximizing, responsibility and reducing downside, but then also ensuring that lots of people all around the world have access to this stuff, doing the collaborative thing that we're starting to do now, I think is really, really paramount.
And from a regulatory perspective, on AI, specifically an American approach, is there anything specific you think, the US should definitely be doing to sort of, make its mark on how AI should be regulated in the world and really be a leader? Often we're behind when it comes to tech policy compared to the EU. What's like the top thing you hope the US puts out, and puts its mark on when it comes to AI regulation?
So I guess I would say a couple of things. The first I've already mentioned, which is really building global coherence. I think the US has really taken a leadership role to date in this discussion and really trying to both understand not just pieces of the problem, but the whole problem, which is sort of the sort of in broad strokes, the effort that the Biden administration has taken. And I think, Vice President Harris, I think was the person who most vocally articulated the need to have a global coherent approach on this. And so I think that's probably the first thing, especially given that a lot of the companies that are building this foundational technology are US companies. I think there's a responsibility there. I think the second one, our big push to the administration and the comments that we submitted to the Department of Commerce, for example, was really, there are a lot of like very in the weeds specific kinds of questions that they were focused on. Like, for example, on open source, how and when should we keep the weights of models secure? And that was a big question. And I worry that we focus too much on like those narrow questions and less on what we were talking about before, which is what are the risks that we need to be worried about across all types of models, and what are the things that we can do as a community to get our arms around it. And I think a real contribution would be looking at some of those specific risk areas, and I imagine this would be through the Safety Institute, but really building consensus on what are the technical benchmarks that people should be using? What are the evaluation tools? What should we think of as a threshold after which we should be concerned? Those kinds of things are really government functions. And I think through the Safety Institute that they're building, the administration has a real opportunity to create some cohesion there.
Let's talk specifically about the latest with Llama. You recently released a new version. Can you tell us what is next for the Llama suite of models, and will it always be the right choice for these to be open source? Is there ever going to be a time when you're going to have to make them more private or proprietary? Is that a long-term thing?
Yeah, so for those who don't have context, Llama is the name that we've given to our suite of large language models. And so last year we open sourced a set of models called Llama 2, and just a couple of weeks ago we released an updated version called Llama 3. And so the goal of this really is to put this foundational technology out into the world, both so that people can build on top of it, and also, so that they can improve the technology itself. So we actually just at our headquarters in Menlo Park last week held what we call a Llama Global Community Summit. And so we brought together developers that are building really interesting, exciting applications with Llama to talk with our developers and figure out what are the things that we need to do to best enable that community. And so I think that's a really important part when we think about, the people that are using Llama to help governments make public policy decisions around investment priorities, or, how to deploy health information or education to underserved communities. Like, these things are really exciting and important. And so I'm excited that Llama has been a part of doing that. When it comes to sort of what the trajectory is, our general approach has been sort of start with, and I think this is on large language models, but I mentioned earlier that we've done a lot of other open sourcing, and this has kind of been the pattern is take the foundational technology, make it as powerful as possible, and open source it so that we can make this technology available to developers so they can solve lots of problems rather than us just trying to solve a few. But then we're also going to build on top of it. So Meta AI is the product that we offer in WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook. And so building on top of Llama ourselves, just like any other developer would, to have bespoke kind of specific capabilities that people can develop in and that they can use as a part of all of the Meta products and services. And so on your question of whether Llama will always be open sourced, so obviously I can't look into the future and say with certainty this is always going to be the case. I think in general our posture is we think that we do better, but also the community does better when technology is open sourced. But at the same time, I think we have a responsibility, particularly as the models get more sophisticated and capable, to do an evaluation in each case to see if that's the right decision. So, for example, Mark Zuckerberg, our CEO, has said we're in the process of training a 400 billion parameter large language model. And so that's still in training. But one of the things that we need to do as a part of that is do evaluations of that model and look at it. And before making a decision on whether to release it or how to release it, we need to understand the capabilities and risks and benefits. And so that's kind of the approach that we'll take.
And as far as just sustainability, how Meta is going to profit off of this stuff, how are you thinking about how your AI tools are going to eventually make money for the company?
So again, I mean, I think similar to drawing an analogy from the other kinds of open source projects that we've had, where there's foundational technology that we can build once and make available, but also use for ourselves. I think that's largely the sort of what is the main business vision here. And so specifically what that means is, as a social media company, as a company that enables people to communicate, the more people that have access to this technology to communicate, the more businesses that have access to it to be able to, expand their businesses and reach people. We've offered some generative AI tools for advertisers too. The more that we can use this technology to enable people to be successful with their own enterprises, that works to the benefit of our business overall. So that's one big area that we're focused on. And so you'll see us continue to both build foundational technology, but also use that technology for specific applications. And then I think the second thing goes back to what I said before, is I think our bet is that if we open source, the community will be building and improving the technology along with us. And so it's not just going to be stuff that we can cook up in our generative AI product team, but in addition to that, it's going to be things that the community comes up with. And so two examples that I think are really illustrative of what we hope is, I think for Llama 2, there's, thousands at this point of derivative models, many of which focus on different languages. And so rather than us having to come up with the capability to use large language models in every language around the world, including some that are traditionally low resourced, having people have the ability to do that and provide that capability when it's not something that we would have to build or that we might not get to as quickly as somebody in a particular country, that's super important. Another kind of innovation is making this technology available to more people, particularly people that don't have, as I said before, the resources and the compute capacity that a company like Meta has. And so, for example, when we released Llama 1 as a research release, actually the innovation that allowed us to that allowed that model to be made smaller and to be able to run on somebody's desktop computer, that didn't come out of Meta. That came out of the open source community. And I think that's going to be foundational for a lot of what comes next as we start thinking about how we do large language models and form factors like our smart glasses. Making sure that, and also for people that are using phones and want to be able to deploy Llama on a mobile phone. These capabilities are going to be really important. And the fact that came out of the community is good for the community, but it's also good for us.
And last question, we only have a minute left, but, given your role in privacy, let's just talk a little bit about balancing privacy and, people's rights to their data with the way that these models need to be trained on so much data. And how are you thinking about that balance?
So there's a lot of work happening at the company, and I think in the AI community more broadly on protecting privacy. I think it's important to be able to both give people access to the benefits of this technology and to be able to be empowered to have the resources that generative AI will provide and also have their data protected. And I think it is maybe not intuitive, but I think it is both possible and important to have both of those.
It doesn't seem to line up, but you're saying it can.
I mean, I think you have to do additional work for it to line up. But so, I mean, I know we've talked in the past about our comprehensive privacy program. So, we've actually just made a bunch of changes to expand the scope of the team that runs our privacy program, so that the same kinds of comprehensive work that we do to evaluate products and services for privacy, that's done on all of our AI products and services, but actually we're thinking about the privacy as a part of a broader set of risks and things that we need to do. And we're also working on building technology to be able to build large language models, some of which we're open sourcing for AI. So for example, can we use privacy enhancing technology to anonymize information? Can we segregate information so people choose what goes into the model and what doesn't? Can we build output filters so that we're making sure that once we've done a bunch of work on the training data, that the model is actually, if it did output something that was private, we would catch that on the back end and make sure that it doesn't actually get rendered in product. So there's a bunch of different layers of privacy enhancing technology that we're building in parallel to the foundation models themselves that I think are a really important part of making sure that we can build this exciting technology and give it to people for free, but also do it in a privacy preserving way.
Okay, awesome. And on that note, we are out of time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.